Swords, axes, lances, bows, tomes, all have had their moment in the spotlight. Some more often than others, sure, but each weapon type has had a game where the strongest available weapon belonged to their category. Make no mistake though, the best and the strongest weapon I would not consider to be the same thing. In so many games, the best weapon is the one you get at the end of the game, can enjoy for 1 or 2 chapters and then retires alongside the rest of your units. All well and good, but how useful is that really? Today, I want to go past every game and talk about the strongest weapon, the one that will by the end be the MVP of your run. Before we start, just to clarify, I have excluded staves from this video, since their effects can never really be compared to actual weapons, they simply have different purposes. You could have a sword that automatically wins you chapters, but it still could never provide the same use as a simple heal and vice versa. So only weapons qualify. And how much availability and reliability plays a role in the process of deciding the strongest weapon is perfectly illustrated by our first game, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. This game, as well as a few other early titles, kinda precedes weapons with ridiculous stats and availability. Weapon durability also played a massive role in keeping what statistically are the best possible weapons at bay. Not to mention that in these games, you always obtained them in the end game, something that has definitely changed nowadays. Anyway, for me that leaves 2 candidates for Fire Emblem's first ever game, and they immediately show how difficult this question actually is. On one hand you have the Silver Lance. Strong weapon, good stats, available from the mid-game onwards and widely equipable by all kinds of units. On the other hand, there is the Rapier, which is available right from the start, can easily be restocked from very early on and does effective damage against both armored and mounted units, some of the most commonly seen enemy types of the game. Stat-wise, it's no Silver Lance and it can only be used by Marth. So, which will it be? Both of these have their arguments to be made, and this kind of split is one we will see quite often in this video, especially because later on, some of the best weapons in the game can only be used by one unit. The one core difference there, I would argue, is that while those weapons might be restricted in their availability, their lead over their closest competitor is still big enough to withstand that con. Here, I wouldn't say that is the case. Rapiers are very useful in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but they're not so ridiculously good that it outweighs the massive cons it does have compared to the Silver Lance, and so I would say that is the best weapon in Arcania's first adventure. Just like Famicom's Shadow Dragon, hell, arguably even more so, Gaiden also lacks any truly powerful weapons until the usual names appear in the endgame. Out of all 17 games, I would say Gaiden was the hardest to pick, which is ironic since Shadows of Valentia was actually one of the easiest, as you'll see later, and that also means that this game's best weapon is probably the worst one out of the 17. And that questionable honor I will bestow upon the Lightning Sword, which is really just a Levin sword with a different name. Unique to this weapon though, compared to its more often seen brother, is that the Lightning Sword always does 15 damage, which is then decreased by the opponent's resistance. Combine that with the fact that this is the only weapon to attack using magic without losing HP in this game, it of course has a range of 1 and 2, as well as being available as early as chapter 1, and you might begin to see how the exact scenario I mentioned earlier of a weapon becoming your MVP might begin to emerge. Of course, the further you go, the harder this weapon falls off, and by the endgame you probably have stopped really using it beyond being a ranged option. But by that point it has served you well and has earned its rest. And really, there's not much competition anyway. The Lightning Sword is the strongest of the many somewhat unremarkable weapons in Gaiden. I would say the first game with a true, clear and properly deserved winner is Mystery of the Emblem. Whereas Rapiers did decently enough to keep up with Silver Lances in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, the far wider availability of the latter now has made it no contest in this game. I wouldn't even really call it a mid-game item anymore, it's buyable in both books from chapter 8 onward, that's borderline early. And with basically the exact same capabilities as before, plus a brand new, very strong unit who's capable of using them is serious, and we can very quickly move on because there's really no competition in sight, I would argue. Genealogy of the Holy War is a lot more interesting game from the perspective of this video, I think, because it's the first that really introduces a whole slew of legendary, ridiculously powerful weapons, as has more or less become a custom since. but like say the falchion before it, despite their clear strength, these weapons remain too restricted to really be in the running for the title, I think. Instead, the true duel is between two weapons that are far from exclusive, usually. The first of our candidates is the Silver Sword, which can be obtained by Sigurd as early as the prologue, which is ridiculously early for a weapon this strong and reliable. Seliph can then also start with it right out of the gate if he inherited it from his father, meaning that you can basically use it for the entire game front to back, which is unheard of for a strong weapon at this point in time. However, the Silver Sword, unlike in other games, can only be used in a convenient way by the Sigurd-Seliph duo, and as such is quite restricted in its options. The Brave Sword, which is obtained near the end of chapter 3, so still quite early, is not bound by these restrictions and can be used by the vast majority of the cast you actually want to use, due to its B weapon rank versus the Silver Sword's A. Its might is a little lower, but the guaranteed double hits are a huge boon in a game that introduced skills, so I would personally consider the Brave Sword the winner. Praise be to Jugdrall though, this is the first game where we have a competition between two actually really good weapons. When we return to the continent for Thracia 776, I'm afraid there is no competition to speak of. For the first time in the series, only a legendary weapon can be considered the best in the game, being none other than Forseti, the Holy Wind Tome used by Sed. Now, Sed isn't recruited until chapter 23, after which only a few remain, which I used as an example of a problem before, but Sed frequently appears as an ally in this game in several chapters before joining, allowing you to see and benefit from the exceptional might of Forseti early on, and to put it simply, Forseti is so much better than any other weapon in this game. Its late availability is a con it can take. Let me paint you a picture here. This tome has a might of 20, bonus damage to flying units, has 30 crit, 50 uses, which is more than enough to carry you from chapter 23 straight to the credits, and gives both speed and skill plus 20. And let it be noted that stats in Thracia only ever go up to 20, meaning you're guaranteed to hit the cap right then and there. It's a ridiculous kit, it's absolutely insane, and even though it definitely doesn't fall into your hands in chapter 1, I would consider it the strongest weapon throughout any Thracia run. Next up is the Binding Blade, where it was so tempting to give this title to the titular weapon for doing the impossible and making Roy good. But alas, it's not that good that I'm willing to disregard how late it becomes available, and so we shift our focus towards really a whole slew of weapons. And what they all have in common is the word killer. Can't really go wrong with either killer axes, bows, edges or lances. They're all incredibly good in their own right. And hey, higher chances to crit also means higher chances to see those awesome animations. That has to account for something, right? Personally, I'd say the Killer Lance probably has the most utility all across the board, with many units that love it in their inventory, while for example the Killer Edge is more specifically suited for someone like Rutger, and he also has Durandal to account for. Again though, can't really go wrong with any of them. On to the Blazing Blade, which actually gave us a legendary weapon early on for a change. But no, the Manikadi ain't it. It's basically just a rapier at a point where that weapon had been long eclipsed by better options. Instead, this game kicks off an entire era where two sets of weapons basically take turns being by far the best: the hand axe and the javelin. Starting with the Blazing Blade, the average difficulty of the games would go down a bit and the amount of filler enemies would increase tenfold, making these reliable, hard-hitting ranged weapons usable by flying units the absolute rage. This phenomenon of sorts would continue to remain present for not just the Blazing Blade, but the entire next set of games, so for the sake of not wasting your time, I'll go over these games a little faster. To wrap up the adventure in a leap, I'd say that purely based on the availability of useful users, I'd give the win to the hand axe here. But for Sacred Stones, it's the other way around, and while both remain king, the winner now is the javelin. Enemies in this game are ever so slightly weaker even compared to the Blazing Blade, which makes the javelin's lower might less of a problem, and a pretty big difference is also the changes made to paladins. In the Blazing Blade, they could use all three weapons in the triangle, and Sacred Stones, axes were removed, removing quite some utility from hand axes, pushing them below javelins for me. And then we have Path of Radiance, where the pendulum swings the other way again. This time it's mostly the result of axe users being a little stronger across the board than lance users, I would say, although the difference is probably the smallest it has ever been. I also want to give a shout out to Ragnar, which is absolutely up there in terms of most powerful weapons we've ever had, but it simply becomes available too late for me to crown it the winner. It comes close though, it's an absolute monster. And well, it's a bit of a boring answer, but I think that Radiant Dawn's situation mirrors Path of Radiance down to a T. Once again, javelins and hand axes are very close, with hand axes getting the slight preference from me. And Ragnar again is a menace, but only available in the endgame. So yeah, same winners for both Tellius games. As we enter onto the Nintendo DS and its remakes though, the era of the hand axe and javelin supremacy comes to an end. The advantages that made them so good aren't present in the Arcania games, so does that then mean that the Silver Lance again reigns supreme? Well, in Shadow Dragon, definitely not. Newly introduced is the Wing Spear, Shida's personal exclusive weapon, and it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best weapon in the game, to the point it has solely made Shida one of the best units available. The Wing Spear is essentially a rapier on steroids, and that was already a candidate for the title all the way back on the Famicom. The Wing Spear has the same very useful effectiveness against armored and cavalry units, but also has more might, is usable on a unit that has far greater mobility than Marth, and is just as easy to obtain multiples of. So yeah, clear winner as far as I'm concerned. Next up is New Mystery of the Emblem, which I definitely consider among the hardest games to pick a winner for. This game really doesn't have any true, obvious standouts. Its weapons are actually supremely well balanced. They all have their moment in the spotlight depending on what phase of the game you're in. And while say the Wormslayer's moment of truth is during the phase where it matters most, it's basically unusable before that, so calling it the best feels off. The Wing Spear has been nerfed a little, now only being available in shops far later in the game, so I guess the winner is probably still the Silver Lance out of sheer utility, availability and consistency, I guess. All throughout the game you can rely on the Silver Lance. It will never be the outright best weapon you have, but it's always, say, top 3, the silent hero of your campaign. When we head to Awakening in the era of true, borderline unlimited customization, we also find the start of weapons that begin to feel a tad broken. In this game, it's not really a secret that magic is where it's at. No weaknesses, 1 and 2 range, and enemies with pretty low resistance all across the board make tomes the weapon type we have to look at. And then you very quickly find yourself looking at Nosferatu. The ability to drain health from enemies has always been really good, but Awakening is the first game that makes a tome that does it widely available, and really it just turns every character that has it into what feels like an unbeatable monster. Oh, when an enemy attacks first? Just survive the hit, then hit back with Nosferatu and heal all that damage right back. Its might may be a little too low to carry you all the way into the endgame, at which point Celica's Gale probably becomes the new winner, but since that is very unreliably available and not really necessary until the very end, I'm giving the crown to Nosferatu without a second thought. Usually in these type of videos I separate the free versions of fates, but today I don't want to do that because I think it's a lot more fun to pick the strongest weapon in all of the free games, rather than just pick one for each. Although I guess this technically just means we're only doing Revelation in a sense. Oh well. I'd say here the very obvious candidates are either Yato, accompanied by your favorite adjective, Raijinto, Ryoma's signature weapon, and Siegfried, the same thing but for Xander. While Yato is definitely good, the fact that it constantly changes throughout your playthrough makes it a little hard to judge, with its strength being able to feel quite different depending on where in the game you are. If an upgrade is around the corner, it tends to start to lag behind a little, for example. Siegfried is also excellent, that much is clear, but I cannot see another winner here than Raijinto. The bonuses it gives out are simply more useful than Siegfried's, and there are actually more of them too, at the cost of some minor defense and resistance debuffs. It's also worth pointing out that Ryoma joins your army earlier in both his own version and Revelation than Xander does, so while the difference isn't massive, Raijinto is also available a tad earlier. Next in line is Shadows of Valentia. Like I said before, while the lightning sword is still useful, it has now been eclipsed completely by a weapon that didn't even exist when Gaiden released. Anyone who has ever played this game knows how dependable you are on bows throughout your playthrough, and the killer bow is the best of them all, keeping availability in mind of course. There are so many maps throughout your journey here that are just begging you to put the 1 to 3 range of the killer bow to good use and pick off enemies before they can ever reach you. It's unparalleled. And then I haven't even mentioned that only this weapon allows you to learn the powerful Hunter's Volley skill, which synergizes very well with the already increased crit chances of the base weapon. Point being, whereas Gaiden was one of the hardest games to pick a winner for, this was one of the easiest. I would hate to play Shadows of Valentia without the killer bow, it's an absolute necessity. Three Houses is a game that, as you probably know, is filled to the absolute brim with ridiculously powerful heroes relics that are also available quite early in many cases. And while a whole bunch of these are really good, I don't think there is a weapon in the entire series quite like Aimer, Edelgard's signature weapon. I mean, this one feels borderline unfair. It allows her to use the combat art Raging Storm, which is effectively just a gale force that keeps going and going and going and doesn't even have to defeat the enemy to activate. It's ridiculous. And while, unlike most other weapons at this point in the series, Aimer does have durability to account for, the same goes for all other heroes' relics, and while the standard weapons are more freely available, they aren't even close to what Aimer is capable of. Fodlan has a lot of weapons that could have very well won in another game, but Aimer is beyond equal. I would go as far as to say it's up there as probably the strongest weapon we've ever had, especially when you keep in mind it becomes available as early as the time skip, rather than the last 2 chapters like most of its competition. And last but not least, there is Engage, which is another very tricky one. There is so much to account for here, from engravings to emblems to reclassing, it's variable upon variable upon variable. But after trying to make sense of it all, I would say the best weapon here is Bolganone. It has a good balance between might and weight, with 16 of the first and 11 of the latter, can obviously attack from range, and very important for this game, is hard to break. It's also not reliant on other factors like bond rings, which other powerful magic attacks like Foron and Thunder are. I did also consider the Levin sword, which is only a little weaker and has similar great utility, while also being available earlier, but since Bolganone is hardly an endgame item, I'm still going with the tome we are apparently never gonna call Volcano at this point. So, do you agree with my picks? What do you consider the strongest weapons in Fire Emblem history? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.